Beneath the burning sun of North Africa, where golden sands meet the eternal Nile, lies a land that has carried the weight of human civilization longer than almost any other place on Earth. Egypt is not just a country. It is the memory of humanity. Carved in stone, written in papyrus, whispered through the desert winds, and sung by the river that has given it life for more than 7,000 years. Here, colossal monuments stand like eternal guardians, watching as empires rise and fall. Here, the mysteries of pharaohs, the echoes of priests, and the ambitions of conquerors have shaped not only a nation, but the destiny of the world itself. This is not merely the story of Egypt. It is the story of us all, of civilization itself, its triumphs, its tragedies, and its unending search for immortality. Stay with us as we journey through history, culture, economy, and the current heartbeat of a nation that refuses to fade into the sands of time, long before the pyramids rose against the horizon, long before the pharaohs were crowned with golden diadems. The fertile banks of the Nile were already alive with human endeavor. As early as 10,000 BCE, small communities gathered along the river's edges, taming its floods, planting the first seeds of agriculture, and learning the rhythms of the land. The Nile was no ordinary river. It was a god, a provider, a lifeline that turned barren desert into a green artery of life. Every summer, its waters swelled, spilling across the plains, leaving behind dark, rich silt that nourished fields of wheat and barley. Villages became towns, and towns evolved into centers of trade and ritual. By the dawn of 3100 BCE, Egypt had transformed into one of the world's first unified states, brought together by a legendary king known as Narmer, or Menes, who wore the crown of both Upper and Lower Egypt, forging a kingdom that would endure for millennia. The early dynastic period is not simply about power, it was about identity. The Egyptians invented a language of pictures, hieroglyphs, to record their triumphs, their beliefs, and their prayers. They built mastabas, precursors to the pyramids, as resting places for their rulers, believing that death was not an end but a passage to eternity. Gods and goddesses filled their world. Ra, the sun god, who sailed across the sky each day; Osiris, the ruler of the underworld; and Isis, the mother of magic and protection. Ritual and religion intertwined with daily life in ways that shaped every act, from farming to governance. Priests became keepers of cosmic balance, while kings stood as divine mediators between heaven and earth. It was a time of foundations, where myths were woven into the fabric of politics, and where the dream of immortality became the greatest ambition of all. Then came the Old Kingdom, the age of the pyramids, a period that defined Egypt's image for all eternity. Around 2600 BCE, Pharaoh Djoser ordered the construction of the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, designed by the genius architect Imhotep, the first monumental stone structure in human history. This innovation sparked a golden era of architectural ambition, culminating in the pyramids of Giza. Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops, commissioned the Great Pyramid, a wonder that has stood for over 4,500 years, defying time, war, and weather. These were not mere tombs, they were stairways to the stars, eternal machines for kings to ascend to the afterlife. The Old Kingdom flourished on centralized power, organized labor, and the steady gifts of the Nile. But beneath the grandeur, tensions brewed, famine, corruption, and local rivalries, until the kingdom splintered into chaos, ushering in the first intermediate period. Chaos, however, did not mean collapse. From the ashes of disorder rose the Middle Kingdom, a renaissance of Egyptian strength and art. Between 2050 and 1650 BCE, rulers such as Mentuhotep II reunited the land, bringing stability after generations of strife. This was an age of literature, of deep philosophical hymns and laments carved into papyrus. where Egyptians reflected on justice, destiny, and the fragile nature of human life. Temples multiplied, trade flourished with lands as far as Nubia, Byblos, and the Levant. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs, unlike their Old Kingdom predecessors, presented themselves not only as god-kings but also as shepherds of the people, guardians who shared in the struggles of life and death. Yet even in their greatness, they faced threats from beyond their borders. As new powers began to rise, testing Egypt's resilience, the Second Intermediate Period brought with it one of Egypt's darkest hours, the invasion of the Hyksos. Foreign people from the Levant who brought horses, chariots, and new weapons of war. For the first time in centuries, Egypt's throne was held by outsiders, and the proud civilization felt the sting of subjugation. Yet this humiliation sparked a transformation. The Egyptians adapted the very tools of their conquerors, mastering chariot warfare, bronze weaponry, and new diplomatic strategies. From Thebes, a southern city of resilience and determination, the kings of the 17th dynasty rose in defiance. Their struggle culminated in the campaigns of Moses, who drove out the Hyksos and founded the new kingdom. What followed would be Egypt's most glorious age, an empire of conquest, wealth, and cultural brilliance that stretched its influence across the ancient world, the New Kingdom. Born in the aftermath of victory was Egypt at its zenith, a civilization that not only survived invasion but turned its wounds into fuel for greatness. Between 1550 and 1070 BCE, Egypt transformed into a global power, extending its borders deep into Nubia and reaching north into the Levant. Pharaohs like Thutmose III led armies that crossed deserts and rivers, crushing enemies and returning with spoils of gold, captives, and exotic goods. Egypt became a superpower of the ancient world, a nation of wealth and splendor that dazzled all who encountered it. Yet conquest was not only about weapons, it was also about ideas. With every victory, Egypt absorbed foreign gods, luxuries, and technologies, weaving them into its own identity. Temples grew larger, cities swelled with trade, and monuments towered toward the heavens, each more ambitious than the last. This was the dawn of empire, a dream of eternal dominion carved into the very fabric of the Nile Valley. Among the rulers of this golden age, one figure stands apart with defiance: Hatshepsut, the woman who became king. At a time when the throne was reserved for men, Hatshepsut crowned herself pharaoh, donning the false beard of kingship and commanding armies with the same authority as her male counterparts. She was not only a ruler but a visionary builder, commissioning temples and monuments that spoke of her divine legitimacy. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, with its sweeping terraces and towering colonnades, remains one of the greatest architectural achievements of the New Kingdom. Beyond war and politics, she turned Egypt's gaze outward, reviving long-distance trade expeditions, including the legendary voyage to the mysterious land of Punt, a journey that brought back incense, myrrh, trees, and riches that filled Egyptian temples. Hatshepsut's reign revealed that power in Egypt was as much about perception as blood, and that the divine aura of kingship could transcend gender. If Hatshepsut symbolized stability and expansion through diplomacy, Akhenaten symbolized disruption through belief. Originally named Amenhotep IV, he shattered centuries of religious tradition by declaring that the old gods were obsolete, elevating a single deity, Aten, the sun disk, as the supreme and only god. In a dramatic act of defiance, he closed temples, redirected resources, and built a new capital city, Akhetaten modern Amarna, dedicated entirely to Aten's worship. For a moment, Egypt teetered on the edge of revolution, a land where art shifted to more realistic styles, where intimacy and humanity were captured in carvings of the royal family, and where divine power rested not in a pantheon, but in the blazing sun itself. Yet Akhenaten's dream was fragile. His radical reforms angered priests, destabilized politics. And after his death, his successors, including the young boy king Tutankhamun, swiftly restored the old order. The heretic king was erased from monuments, his city abandoned to the desert winds, but the memory of his rebellion still haunts history. The late New Kingdom was dominated by warrior pharaohs, who secured Egypt's empire through blood and stone. None was greater than Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great, who reigned for more than 60 years and became the embodiment of Egyptian power. He fought the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh, one of the largest chariot battles in history, where tens of thousands clashed in a fury of bronze and horse-drawn thunder. Though the battle ended in stalemate, Ramses immortalized it as a triumph, inscribing his victory on temple walls across Egypt. Beyond war, he built relentlessly, leaving behind colossal statues, obelisks, and temples, including the awe-inspiring Abu symbol carved into cliffs along the Nile. His reign symbolized endurance, ambition, and divine might, earning him a place not only in Egyptian memory, but also in biblical tradition, where Hayes often associated with the Pharaoh of Exodus. In Ramses, Egypt reached both the peak of its glory and the shadow of its decline. As the empire stretched itself thin, Egypt began to unravel. The wealth of conquest waned, foreign rivals grew stronger, and internal corruption weakened the state. The Sea Peoples, mysterious raiders from the Mediterranean, launched devastating attacks that shook Egypt's foundations. Successive pharaohs struggled to maintain authority, while priests of Ammon in Thebes grew so powerful that they rivaled the throne itself. By the end of the New Kingdom, Egypt had fractured once again, divided between competing rulers in the north and south. Though the monuments remained, the spirit of empire had faded, and Egypt entered a long era of vulnerability. The once unstoppable power of the Nile had become prey for outsiders, Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, and Persians, who would all leave their mark on the fading giant. Yet through every conquest, Egypt endured, its culture never extinguished, only reshaped, waiting for the next chapter in its eternal story. The centuries after the New Kingdom saw Egypt lose much of its independence, but never its soul. The late period, beginning around 664 BCE, was an age of both decline and resilience. Foreign dynasties, including the Nubians of the 25th dynasty, briefly restored Egypt's former might, embracing the traditions of the pharaohs as if they had been born. Of the Nile itself, kings like Taharqa built temples and monuments in the style of earlier ages, striving to revive the glory of the Old Kingdom and New Kingdom. Yet Egypt was no longer the isolated powerhouse it once had been. Powerful empires, Assyria, Persia, and later, Greece loomed beyond its borders. Drawn by the wealth of the Nile, the Persians conquered Egypt twice, ruling with satraps but allowing the priests of Ammon and local traditions to continue. Each wave of conquest threatened to erase Egypt's independence, but each time, the cultural identity of the Egyptians remained stubbornly unbroken. Their gods, their rituals, and their visions of eternity survived even as foreign crowns weighed heavy upon them. It was Alexander the Great who changed Egypt's destiny forever. In 332 BCE, the young Macedonian conqueror swept through the Persian Empire and entered Egypt as a liberator. The Egyptians, weary of Persian rule, welcomed him as a savior, crowning him pharaoh in Memphis and hailing him as a son of Amun. Alexander founded a new city on the known Mediterranean coast, Alexandria, designed as a beacon of Greek and Egyptian unity. After his untimely death, his empire fractured, and Egypt fell under the rule of the Ptolemies, a dynasty of Greek origin that would blend Hellenistic ambition with Egyptian tradition. The Ptolemies embraced the imagery of the pharaohs worshipped Egyptian gods alongside Greek deities and commissioned temples that honored both worlds. Alexandria became one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, home to the Library of Alexandria, a treasure of knowledge and scholarship, and the Pharaohs Lighthouse, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Under the Ptolemies, Egypt was both Greek and Egyptian, a hybrid kingdom of immense cultural wealth. The most famous of the Ptolemies was Cleopatra VII, Nizioni, the last queen of Egypt, whose name still echoes through history and legend. Unlike many of her predecessors, Cleopatra was not content to rule as a passive monarch. She was a strategist, a linguist who spoke several languages, and a diplomat who played the dangerous game of survival between Rome's competing powers. Her alliances and romances with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony were not merely affairs of passion, but deliberate efforts to preserve Egypt's independence in the shadow of Rome's expanding empire. Yet destiny was cruel. After the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, Egypt fell under Roman control. Cleopatra's death, often remembered as a tragic suicide by the bite of an asp, symbolized the end of the pharaohs and the beginning of Egypt as a Roman province. Though the age of independent Egypt had ended, its legacy continued to captivate the imagination of emperors and poets alike. For centuries, under Roman rule, Egypt remained the empire's breadbasket, its fertile Nile fields feeding Rome's legions and cities. Temples were maintained, old gods worshipped, but slowly, new winds began to blow. Christianity spread across Egypt, carried by missionaries and embraced by common people seeking hope in a new faith. By the 4th century CE, Egypt had become a stronghold of Christianity, producing thinkers like Athanasius of Alexandria and monks, whose desert spirituality shaped the future of the Church. The once dominant temples of Ammon, Isis, and Ra fell silent, their statues toppled or repurposed. Alexandria, still a center of knowledge, became a battleground of ideas where philosophy, theology, and politics clashed in turbulent waves. The old Egypt of the pharaohs had faded, replaced by a new religious and cultural identity that would endure for centuries to come. Then, in the 7th century, another transformation arrived, the coming of Islam. In 641 CE, Arab forces under General Amr ibn al-As conquered Egypt, bringing it into the expanding Islamic Caliphate. The conquest was swift, but unlike previous invasions, it reshaped the very fabric of Egyptian life. Islam and the Arabic language spread across the land, blending with Egyptian traditions to create a new identity, that of a Muslim nation, with deep roots in both Africa and the Middle East. Cairo, founded in 969 CE by the Fatimid dynasty, rose as a capital of dazzling beauty, filled with mosques, markets, and schools of learning. Under the Mamluks, Egypt became a military powerhouse. Under the Ottomans, it remained a vital province of empire. Though no longer ruled by pharaohs, Egypt continued to play a central role in the story of the world, its past forever shaping its present, its rivers still flowing as it had since the dawn of time. The culture of Egypt is a river as timeless as the Nile itself, constantly flowing, yet carrying within it the memory of thousands of years. It is a mosaic of traditions, layered one upon another: Pharaonic, Greek, Roman, Coptic, Islamic, and modern. At the heart of this identity lies language. In ancient times, hieroglyphs were not merely a writing system, but a sacred art, each symbol carrying a divine resonance. To carve words into stone was to commune with eternity, to give permanence to thought. As centuries passed, hieroglyphs gave way to Demotic script, then Coptic, a language that carried forward Egyptian sounds through the alphabet of the Greeks. With the arrival of Islam in the 7th century, Arabic became the lifeblood of Egypt's cultural voice. Today, Egyptian Arabic is the most widely understood dialect in the Arab world, a dialect made famous through its music, cinema, and literature. When an Egyptian speaks, it is as if the echoes of millennia vibrate within every word, a living bridge between antiquity and the modern age. Literature in Egypt has always been a mirror of its soul. In the days of the pharaohs, scribes wrote, hymns to the gods, instructions for life, and laments for the dead. The Book of the Dead remains one of the most extraordinary cultural artifacts of the ancient world, a guide for the soul's journey into the afterlife, complete with spells, prayers, and moral guidance. In the Middle Kingdom, wisdom literature flourished, offering reflections on justice, humility, and the fleeting nature of human existence. With the coming of Hellenistic influence, Egyptian libraries, particularly the Library of Alexandria, became repositories of world knowledge. Though that treasure was tragically lost, Egypt's literary flame never dimmed. In modern times, writers like Taha Hussein, Naguib Mahfouz, the first Arab Nobel laureate in literature, and Ahmed Fuad Negm gave voice to the struggles, dreams, and revolutions of their people. Egyptian literature remains not just storytelling but a call to consciousness, a dialogue between past and present. Religion and spirituality have always woven themselves into Egyptian culture, shaping values, art, and identity. In the age of the Pharaohs, Egyptians lived not for the present, but for eternity. Measuring every act against the scales of Mat, the cosmic principle of truth, justice, and balance. The gods were everywhere, in the sun that rose each morning, in the floodwaters of the Nile, in the afterlife awaiting every soul. Temples were not just places of worship, but centers of music, learning, and community. Christianity brought new traditions of fasting, saints, and sacred chants carried within. The Coptic Church. Islam added yet another profound layer, filling Egyptian life with the call to prayer, the poetry of the Quran, and the beauty of Sufi mysticism. Even today, whether in the rhythmic recitation of the Quran, the solemn hymns of a Coptic liturgy, or the ancient songs preserved in rural festivals, spirituality permeates the Egyptian spirit like an unbroken thread. Egypt's contribution to architecture and art is inseparable from its cultural identity. From the moment humans began stacking stone along the Nile, they built not only for shelter, but for meaning. The pyramids were mathematical symphonies of stone, testaments to an obsession with immortality. Temples like Karnak and Luxor were sprawling, theaters of ritual, their walls inscribed with scenes that told stories of gods, kings, and cosmic order. But Egyptian art did not remain frozen in time. Islamic Cairo, with its labyrinthine alleys and skyline of minarets, became a jewel of medieval architecture, filled with mosques like Al-Azhar and Sultan Hassan, whose domes and courtyards embodied both grandeur and grace. The fusion of geometric design, calligraphy, and spiritual intention created an art form that endures as one of the most beautiful expressions of Islamic civilization. Every brick, every carving, every arch is a reminder that in Egypt, art has always been a form of prayer. Even in the modern age, the cultural heart of Egypt beats with remarkable vitality. Cairo became the Hollywood of the Arab world in the 20th century, producing films and songs that reached millions across the Middle East. Legends like Kulthum, Abdel Halim Hafez, and Mohammed Abdel Wahab defined Arab music, their voices resonating with longing, love, and national pride. Egyptian cinema, with icons like Fatin Hamama and Omar Sharif, introduced the world to Arab storytelling, blending tradition with modernity. Festivals, both ancient and contemporary, punctuate the Egyptian year. Sham el-Nessim, a spring celebration, dating back to pharaonic times. Ramadan nights alive with lanterns and communal feasts. And Malids, colorful gatherings honoring saints. Through all of these expressions, words, music, architecture, and ritual, Egypt has shown the world that culture is not static. It is a living river, flowing endlessly, adapting, and yet always carrying the eternal memory of the Nile. Festivals in Egypt are more than just dates on a calendar. They are echoes of millennial traditions woven together from pharaonic, Coptic, and Islamic threads. One of the most remarkable survivals is Sham el-Nessim, a spring festival celebrated since the days of the Pharaohs. Families still gather along the Nile or in parks to eat salted fish, onions, and lettuce. Symbols of renewal and life, the very same foods depicted in tomb paintings thousands of years ago. The Islamic calendar brings Ramadan, a month of fasting, but also a time of joy when lanterns known as Pharaohs light the streets and neighborhoods hum with the sound of Quranic recitation. Laughter and late-night feasts. The breaking of the fast each evening becomes a celebration of togetherness, culminating in Eid al-Fitr, marked by prayers, sweets, and the embrace of family. Coptic Christians celebrate Christmas on January 7th and Easter with midnight masses, traditions deeply rooted in their ancient faith. These festivals, though born of different religions, are celebrated side by side, painting Egypt with a tapestry of shared joy that transcends division. Cuisine, like the Nile, sustains Egypt's identity, carrying flavors and recipes across centuries. Egyptian food is hearty, simple, yet filled with history. Dishes like ful madams, slow-cooked, fava beans, seasoned with oil and spices, date back to Pharaonic times and remain a staple breakfast for millions. Koshari, a national dish, is a symbol of Egypt's layered identity. Lentils, rice, pasta, chickpeas, and spicy tomato sauce combined into a single bowl, reflecting the mixture of cultures that have passed through the land. Bread, particularly the round aish baladi, is more than food. Its name, aish, means life in Arabic, underscoring its sacred importance. Street vendors sell roasted corn, falafel known locally as tamaya, and sweet pastries dripping with honey. Lamb stews, stuffed vegetables, and grilled fish reflect both rural simplicity and urban sophistication. To eat in Egypt is to partake in a ritual of community. Food is always shared, always offered with hospitality, always accompanied by stories that tie the present to the ancestors. Music in Egypt is the beating heart of its culture, a soundscape that spans the ancient to the modern. Archaeologists have uncovered harps, lutes, and flutes buried in tombs, instruments once played to accompany hymns for gods and kings. In villages along the Nile, folk songs carry the rhythm of harvest and love, their melodies guided by the rababa, a one-stringed fiddle, or the hypnotic beat of the tabla drum. The Islamic centuries brought devotional songs and muashahat, poetic compositions that echoed in mosques and palaces alike. In the 20th century, Egypt became the musical capital of the Arab world, crowned by the voice of Kulthum. Her performances, lasting hours, were not concerts but spiritual experiences, her voice weaving longing, patriotism, and love into something transcendent. Today, Egypt's musical landscape spans traditional folk, classical Arabic, and contemporary pop, but in every form, it remains a vessel of emotion, a way for Egyptians to speak with their hearts when words alone are not enough. Dance, too, has deep roots in Egyptian culture, carrying both sacred and celebratory roles. In ancient temples, dancers performed in honor of the gods, movements representing the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Over time, Egyptian dance evolved into both folk traditions and performance arts. Raqs Sharqi, known internationally as belly dance, emerged from local practices and spread worldwide, its fluid movements and vibrant costumes becoming a symbol of sensual expression. Yet within Egypt, it is only one among many forms. Folk dances like Tanura, performed by Sufi whirling dervishes in colorful skirts, transform movement into prayer, spinning in rhythm with divine remembrance. In rural festivals, line dances, accompanied by drums and flutes, celebrate weddings, harvests, and communal bonds. Whether spiritual or celebratory, Egyptian dance embodies a philosophy of life. To move is to exist. To sway is to connect with the rhythms of the earth and the heavens. Crafts and traditional arts keep Egypt's cultural memory alive in the hands of artisans. Pottery, practiced since the days of the Pharaohs, still shapes the vessels that carry water and store grain in villages. Weavers create carpets and textiles with patterns that echo ancient symbols of fertility and protection, while woodworkers carve mashrabia screens, delicate latticework that filters light and air into homes. Metalworkers hammer brass and copper into trays, lanterns, and tea sets that shine in Cairo's bustling bazaars. Calligraphy, elevated by Islamic tradition, transforms the Arabic script into flowing art, adorning mosques, manuscripts, and even everyday objects. These crafts are not merely products, they're inheritances, each piece a testament to centuries of skill passed down through families. To wander through a souk in Cairo or Luxor is to walk through history, each stall an archive of artistry, each artisan a guardian of Egypt's timeless soul. Architecture in Egypt is more than shelter, it is a statement of identity, faith, and continuity. The earliest monuments, from mud brick houses along the Nile to the colossal stone pyramids, reflect a people obsessed with eternity. Every era has left behind a distinctive skyline, the towering temples of Karnak and Abu Simbel, the Greco-Roman theaters of Alexandria, the monasteries of the Desert Fathers, and the domes and minarets of Islamic Cairo. Each layer tells a story of conquest and adaptation. Yet together they form a uniquely Egyptian narrative. Modern Cairo, a sprawling metropolis of over 20 million, juxtaposes glass towers and crowded apartments with medieval alleys and pharaonic relics. It is a city where ancient tombs stand within sight of bustling highways, and where the call to prayer echoes alongside car horns. Egyptian architecture is not frozen in history. It is alive, a palimpsest where every generation inscribes its dreams upon the landscape. Family is the cornerstone of Egyptian culture, binding society through ties stronger than any political system or institution. Traditionally, households extend beyond the nuclear family, including grandparents, uncles, aunts, and cousins who share daily life and responsibilities. Respect for elders is deeply ingrained, and decisions often reflect collective agreement rather than individual desire. Weddings, among the most elaborate of Egyptian celebrations, gather entire neighborhoods with music, food, and dance, embodying the communal spirit of joy. Births are marked with ceremonies like the Sibo, where a newborn is surrounded by songs, candles, and prayers for protection. Even death is not a solitary event. Mourning rituals bring families and communities together in acts of remembrance and solidarity. In Egypt, family is not just blood. It is a living network of belonging, a shield against hardship, and a source of strength that has allowed the culture to endure through centuries of upheaval. Hospitality in Egypt is legendary, rooted in a cultural code that values generosity as both duty and virtue. To enter an Egyptian home, whether in a Cairo apartment or a village hut along the Nile, is to be welcomed as family. Guests are immediately offered tea or coffee, and soon after, plates of food, often far more than they could possibly eat. Refusing is seen as impolite. Accepting is an act of respect. This tradition dates back to Pharaonic times, when offering bread and water was considered sacred, and continues through Islamic teachings that elevate hospitality as a sign of faith. In bustling souks, vendors invite strangers to share a cup of tea. In desert communities, Bedouin tribes serve visitors with rituals passed down for generations. Hospitality is not transactional in Egypt. It is an affirmation of human connection, a reminder that kindness is the most enduring form of wealth. Modern Egyptian arts carry the weight of this ancient heritage while confronting the challenges of today. Painters and sculptors draw inspiration from hieroglyphs, Islamic geometry, and folk traditions, blending them with contemporary themes of identity, resistance, and hope. Theater, long a vibrant part of Egyptian culture, continues to thrive in Cairo's stages, where playwrights explore issues of politics, class, and modernity. Egyptian cinema, once the undisputed giant of the Arab world, remains a powerful cultural force, producing films that capture both the beauty and the struggles of daily life. Writers, poets, and musicians still shape public consciousness, speaking to the frustrations of youth, the resilience of the poor, and the dreams of a nation always caught between its past and future. Whether through graffiti on Cairo's walls or the verses of street poets, art in Egypt remains not only a mirror of society, but also a weapon of change. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Egyptian culture is its ability to live in two worlds at once, ancient and modern. A farmer in Upper Egypt may plow his field with methods little changed since the days of the Pharaohs, while his son scrolls through social media on a smartphone. Women weave palm leaves into baskets as their ancestors did, yet listen to pop songs on the radio as they work. Students in Cairo study engineering and medicine by day, but in the evening, they wander past monuments built 5,000 years ago. This coexistence is not a contradiction. It is Egypt's essence. The land is both timeless and evolving, its culture both anchored and fluid. Egyptians walk daily in the footsteps of history while carving new paths for the future, embodying a resilience that has allowed their identity to survive every conquest, every empire, and every storm of change. The economy of Egypt has always been written in the waters of the Nile. Without the river, there would be no Egypt. The vast desert stretches endlessly on either side, but along its banks lies a fertile ribbon of black soil enriched each year by the river's flooding. For millennia, this annual inundation was the heartbeat of Egypt's prosperity. Ancient farmers relied on its predictable rhythm, planting wheat, barley, flax, and vegetables in fields nourished by the silt it left behind. The Nile's waters were channeled through an intricate network of canals and basins, an early form of irrigation that allowed Egyptians to sustain one of the densest populations of the ancient world. This agricultural abundance was not just about survival, it was about civilization. Surpluses of grain-fed armies, workers, and priests, enabling monumental construction projects and the rise of cities. In truth, the pharaohs did not build the pyramids with stone alone, but with the bread of the Nile. Agriculture in Egypt was deeply tied to religion, reinforcing its central place in the economy. The goddess Renou-Nutet was worshipped as the divine protector of harvests, while offerings to Hapi, the god of the Nile flood, reflected gratitude for fertile waters. Farming was seasonal, dictated by the river cycles, the flooding season Akit, the growing season Pare, and the harvest Shemu. Each stage structured the life of the people. Workers plowed fields with wooden tools, sowed seeds by hand, and reaped crops with sickles made from flint. Animals like oxen and donkeys were essential to farming and transportation. Granaries, overseen by officials, stored the harvest, ensuring food security and enabling taxation. The pharaoh's control over grain was a cornerstone of political power, allowing him to feed his people in times of scarcity and to finance great projects. The economy of ancient Egypt was thus not only agricultural, but deeply centralized, with the state as both farmer and guardian. Yet Egypt's economy was not confined to its river valley. From the earliest times, Egyptians turned outward, building trade networks that stretched across continents. From Nubia in the south, caravans and boats brought gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animals. From the Sinai Peninsula came copper and turquoise, vital for tools and jewelry. Byblos in Lebanon supplied prized cedar wood, essential for shipbuilding and temple construction. Punt, a mysterious land likely located in modern-day Eritrea or Somalia, provided incense, myrrh, and precious goods. Trade was not only material, but cultural ideas, technologies, and art styles flowed with the movement of goods. The Nile itself was a highway of commerce, carrying boats laden with grain, pottery, papyrus, and textiles from village to village. In every direction, Egypt's wealth radiated outward, binding it into the fabric of the ancient world. Papyrus, One of Egypt's most unique contributions to the economy became a commodity as valuable as gold. Harvested from the stalks of reeds along the Nile, it was transformed into sheets of writing material that enabled record-keeping, literature, and administration. Egypt exported papyrus widely, along with linen woven from flax and glass crafted with extraordinary skill. Artisans and craftsmen thrived, producing jewelry inlaid with lapis lazuli and turquoise, pottery decorated with intricate patterns, and statues carved from limestone and granite. These goods were not only for domestic use but also for export, turning Egypt into a hub of production. Markets thrived in towns and cities, buzzing with the exchange of goods, stories, and traditions, while farmers formed the backbone of the economy. Artisans and traders added diversity, ensuring that Egypt was not only self-sufficient but influential in shaping the wider Tuania and Near Eastern economies. The management of resources was a feat of organization as impressive as any pyramid. Egyptian officials, often priests and scribes, kept detailed records of harvests, trade, and taxation. The use of weights, measures, and even an early form of currency, grain rations and copper pieces, facilitated exchange. The state's ability to control and redistribute resources gave Egypt remarkable resilience in times of drought or political turmoil. But this centralization also meant vulnerability. When floods failed or corruption spread among officials, famine could devastate the population. Despite these challenges, Egypt's economy remained one of the most stable and enduring of the ancient world. For over 3,000 years, the Nile's rhythm created a foundation of wealth and security that allowed Egyptian civilization to flourish. It was not merely an economy. It was the lifeblood of a civilization that defined what it meant to build, trade, and dream on a scale that echoed across the ages. When the armies of Islam swept into Egypt in the 7th century, they did not only bring a new religion, but also a new economic order. Egypt became the beating heart of the Islamic Caliphate, its fertile lands feeding millions and its trade routes channeling wealth into the growing empire. The Arab rulers inherited the agricultural brilliance of the Pharaohs and expanded it, with new irrigation techniques and crops introduced from other parts of the Islamic world. Sugarcane, cotton, rice, and citrus fruits appeared in Egyptian fields, transforming both diet and trade. Cairo, founded in 969 by the Fatimids, quickly became one of the richest cities on earth, a glittering capital where scholars, merchants, and artisans converged. Its bustling markets overflowed with spices from India, silks from China, gold from West Africa, and glassware from Syria. The Nile still nourished the soil, but the camel caravans and Red Sea fleets nourished the empire's treasury. The economy of medieval Egypt was not only agricultural and commercial, but also intellectual. Cairo's markets were not simply places of exchange for goods, but crossroads for ideas. The city became a global hub of learning, drawing scholars from Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba. This culture of scholarship was sustained by wealth generated by land taxes, trade duties, and the industriousness of Egyptian farmers and craftsmen. The state imposed systems of taxation that ensured a steady flow of revenue to rulers. But at times, these taxes weighed heavily on the peasantry. Still, Egypt's strategic position at the crossroads of Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean meant it was always essential to global commerce. Caravans crossed the Sahara with gold and slaves, while ships sailed the Indian Ocean carrying pepper, ivory, and textiles to Egyptian ports. Cairo, with its labyrinthine souk and towering mosques, was the epicenter of this wealth, often described by travelers as a wonder of the medieval world. The rise of the Mamluks in the 13th century ushered in a new chapter of Egypt's economic story. Originally slave soldiers, the Mamluks seized power and transformed Egypt into a formidable state whose influence stretched across the region. Their control of trade routes was both a blessing and a curse. They dominated the flow of spices from the east, making Cairo the primary distribution point for Europe's insatiable demand for pepper, cinnamon, and cloves. The profits were staggering, and for a time, Mamluk sultans presided over one of the wealthiest courts in the world. Yet their economy was perilously dependent on these trade monopolies. When Portuguese navigators discovered sea routes around Africa in the late 15th century, Egypt's control over the spice trade began to crumble. What had once been its greatest source of wealth became a vulnerability, as European ships bypassed the Red Sea and carried the treasures of the East directly to Europe's ports. Under Ottoman rule, which began in 1517, Egypt's economy shifted. Once again, the Ottomans saw Egypt primarily as a grain basket for their empire. The fertile fields along the Nile produced massive quantities of wheat and barley, much of it shipped to Istanbul to feed the Ottoman capital. Egypt remained an important commercial link between Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, but its autonomy was greatly reduced. Cairo was still a vibrant city, filled with artisans, scholars, and merchants. But much of its wealth was siphoned off to serve Ottoman interests. Taxation became increasingly burdensome, and mismanagement often led to periods of hardship for the peasantry. Yet Egypt's strategic location ensured that it never faded from relevance. Caravans continued to arrive, ships continued to sail, and markets continued to thrive, even as new global trade patterns slowly eroded the country's centrality. The medieval and early modern periods left Egypt with an economic legacy of both brilliance and fragility. On one hand, its markets were global crossroads where Africa, Asia, and Europe converged. Its artisans produced works of enduring beauty. Its farmers sustained empires, and its scholars illuminated the intellectual world. On the other hand, Egypt's dependence on foreign trade routes made it vulnerable to shifts beyond its control. When Portuguese and later Dutch and English traders redirected global commerce around Africa and into the Atlantic, Egypt's wealth began to decline. Yet even in decline, Egypt remained indispensable, a land whose Nile-fed fields could not be ignored and whose position between continents ensured that it would always remain a prize for empires. By the dawn of the modern era, Egypt stood at the threshold of another transformation, one that would bring both colonization and modernization, reshaping its economy once again under new masters and new ambitions. The dawn of the 19th century marked a turning point in Egypt's economic history. In 1805, Muhammad Ali, an ambitious Ottoman commander of Albanian origin, seized control and set Egypt on a path of radical transformation. Often called the founder of modern Egypt, Muhammad Ali envisioned an independent, industrialized, and militarily strong nation. He revolutionized agriculture by expanding irrigation, introducing long staple cotton, and enforcing state monopolies that made Egypt the world's leading cotton exporter. Cotton became white gold, flowing from Egypt's fields to the textile mills of Britain and Europe. He also established textile factories, shipyards, and arms industries, hoping to break Egypt's reliance on foreign powers. But this modernization came at a heavy price. Peasants were forced into back-breaking labor. Conscription drained villages of young men, and taxes weighed heavily on the poor. Muhammad Ali's dream was both magnificent and merciless, setting the foundation for Egypt's integration into the global economy, but on terms dictated largely by Europe. By the mid-19th century, the allure of Egypt's geography re-emerged with a monumental project, the Suez Canal, completed in 1869 under the rule of Khedive Ismail. The canal was a marvel of engineering, cutting a direct waterway between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. It transformed Egypt into the linchpin of global trade, connecting Europe to Asia faster than ever before. Yet the canal, built largely with forced labor and financed through crushing debt, became both a blessing and a curse. For Egypt, it promised toll revenues and international prestige. For Europe, it offered control over the lifeline to India. and the Far East. Soon, debt spiraled out of control, and Britain seized financial control over the canal and much of Egypt's economy. What should have been a source of independence became the very instrument of foreign domination. Egypt's cotton profits and canal revenues enriched London and Paris, while Egyptians themselves bore the burden of taxation and economic subjugation. The late 19th century saw a tightening grip of British colonial rule as Egypt was occupied. In 1882, under the pretext of protecting the Suez Canal, the economy was reshaped to serve imperial interests. Cotton, demanded by British industry, dominated agriculture, pushing aside other crops and locking Egypt into a vulnerable monoculture. Infrastructure projects such as railways, ports, and irrigation canals were built, but primarily to facilitate British extraction of resources. The Egyptian peasantry remained impoverished, trapped in cycles of debt to landlords and moneylenders. Meanwhile, a new elite class, tied to colonial administration and global commerce, flourished in Cairo and Alexandria. The gap between wealth and poverty widened dramatically. Egypt's economy had become a mirror of colonial dependency, modern in its outward appearance, with gleaming railways and telegraph lines, yet hollow at its core, designed to benefit an empire across the sea rather than the people of the Nile. In the early 20th century, nationalism and economic frustration walked hand in hand. Egyptians resented the exploitation of their cotton fields and the foreign control over their canal. The 1919 revolution, led by Saad Zaghloul and the Wafd Party, fueled as much by economic grievances as by political demands. Even after partial independence in 1922, British influence lingered, particularly over the canal. During both World Wars, Egypt's economy was harnessed to serve Allied interests, supplying food, cotton, and strategic transport. The Great Depression of the 1930s hit Egypt hard, as global demand for cotton collapsed, exposing the dangers of overdependence on a single crop. Urban workers faced unemployment, while rural communities sank deeper into poverty. Yet amid these hardships, Cairo and Alexandria also became cultural centers, where newspapers, films, and literature expressed the growing frustrations of a nation. Struggling to reclaim its economic destiny, by the mid-20th century, Egypt stood at another crossroads. The Free Officers' Revolution of 1952, led by Gamal Abdel Nasser, was not just a political coup, but an economic reckoning. Nasser sought to dismantle the colonial economic order by nationalizing industries, redistributing land, and taking back control of the Suez Canal in 1956, an act of defiance that electrified the world. The nationalization of the canal symbolized Egypt's attempt to turn its geography into a source of independence rather than exploitation, but challenges remained immense. Egypt faced a rapidly growing population, limited arable land, and the need to modernize industries. Still, the 19th and 20th centuries had transformed Egypt forever, from Muhammad Ali's vision of modernization, through colonial exploitation to nationalist reclamation of resources. The nation's economy was forged in struggle, a struggle between independence and dependency, prosperity and poverty, foreign control and national pride. These battles would shape the challenges and opportunities of Egypt's modern economic era. In the modern era, Egypt stands at the crossroads of history, a nation burdened with the weight of its past and the uncertainty of its future. The Arab Spring of 2011 erupted like a storm across the Middle East, and in Egypt, it became a defining chapter of the 21st century. For decades, Egyptians had lived under authoritarian rule, with limited political freedoms and deep socioeconomic frustrations simmering beneath the surface. In January of that year, millions of people flooded into Cairo's Tahrir Square, chanting for bread, freedom, and social justice. The scenes were electrifying. Families, students, workers, and even the elderly stood shoulder to shoulder, united in their demand for change. The world watched as Hosni Mubarak, Egypt's president for nearly 30 years, was forced to resign. For a moment, it seemed as if the revolution had restored power to the people. Yet the euphoria would not last long. The promise of democracy soon collided with the complexities of governance, ideological divides, and the heavy hand of the military. Following Mubarak's fall, Egypt entered a turbulent chapter of political transition. In 2012, the nation held its first free presidential election, bringing Mohamed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood to power. To his supporters, Morsi represented a chance to blend governance with Islamic identity. But to his critics, his rule was marked by polarization, inefficiency, and fears of authoritarian overreach under a new guise. Within a year, massive protests once again shook the streets as millions demanded his resignation. In 2013, the military intervened, led by General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, removing Morsi from office in a move celebrated by some as a restoration of stability, but condemned by others as a betrayal of democratic aspirations. The cycle of hope and disappointment revealed the profound struggle within Egyptian society. How to balance faith, democracy, and authority in a land where politics has always been entwined with identity and survival. Under Sisi, Egypt returned to strong centralized rule. The government presented itself as a guardian of stability in a region scarred by civil wars and chaos. But critics pointed to a shrinking space for dissent and an iron grip on political life. Opposition parties found little room to maneuver, and protests were met with swift crackdowns. Media outlets operated under tight control, and activists who once led chants in Tahrir Square now faced prison cells or exile. To supporters, Sisi's rule offered a sense of order and the promise of security in a volatile region. To opponents, it was a continuation of Egypt's long history of authoritarianism, a reminder that while leaders may change, the structures of power endure. The dream of 2011 still flickers in the memories of Egyptians, but in the reality of the 2020s, politics has once again become a tightly controlled domain. Beyond leadership, each political identity remains shaped by its geography and history. Sitting at the crossroads of Africa and the Middle East, and controlling the Suez Canal, Egypt is a geopolitical prize too important to be ignored by global powers. The United States, European Union, Russia, and China all maintain strategic ties, with Cairo each seeking influence in trade, security, and regional politics. In this context, Egypt's government leverages its position as a bargaining chip, presenting itself as a stabilizing force against terrorism, migration crises, and regional instability. Yet this external importance often overshadows internal struggles. While Egypt plays the role of a regional power broker, ordinary citizens grapple with inflation, unemployment, and daily frustrations. The disconnect between Egypt's global stage presence and the realities of its tri-stage, as its domestic life remains one of the defining paradoxes of its modern situation. Today, Egypt's politics remain a study in contrasts between the yearning of its Korets, and leaves a rich, long-lasting color. While we see, with long-lasting color, may see a lasting life, life, domestic life remains one of the core in life. We see with series, we see with law, we see with light of seas, we see with seas, play with seas, we see with seas, de why we sees, by we see with the mapes at it, lie it to six it to me you see we li it's a we to you do sus it to size we sick it to amila to sit to sake it because to I said the precus it to pakai it to kasa to consist to people for freedom and dignity, and the state's pursuit of control and stability. Tahrir Square, once a symbol of revolutionary triumph, now stands as a guarded plaza. Its revolutionary murals faded, its memory preserved more in photographs than in practice. Yet within the hearts of Egyptians, the spark of change has not been extinguished. It lingers in conversations, in art, in whispers of hope for future generations. The revolution did not bring the democracy many dreamed of, but it left behind an unshakable truth. Egyptians had once risen together and shaken the very foundations of their state. That memory remains powerful, a reminder that even in the face of oppression, the desire for justice and dignity never truly dies. The current political climate may seem rigid, but the echoes of 2011 continue to reverberate through Egypt's soul. In the bustling streets of Cairo, where traffic jams stretch for miles and vendors call out their wares from crowded markets, Egypt's economic story unfolds in all its complexity. The nation's economy is both ancient and modern, resting on the same foundations that supported the Pharaohs' agriculture along the Nile, trade through the Suez, and the labor of millions. Yet in the 21st century, the demands are far greater, and the challenges far sharper. Inflation eats into the pockets of ordinary Egyptians, while a rapidly growing population over 110 million people places immense pressure on resources, housing, and jobs. For many, daily life is a battle of survival, balancing meager wages against the rising costs of food, fuel, and basic necessities. The economy, much like the Nile itself, carries both promise and hardship, shaping every corner of Egyptian society. Tourism, once Egypt's golden lifeline, has experienced waves of revival and collapse. The pyramids of Giza, the temples of Luxor, the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, and the beaches of the Red Sea draw millions of visitors each year. But political unrest, terrorism, fears, and global crises like the COVID-19 pandemic have dealt devastating blows to the industry. For towns like Luxor and Aswan, where entire communities depend on the flow of tourists, the loss of income has been crushing. Yet the resilience of Egyptians is visible here. Guides who once narrated the glories of ancient kings now find new ways to adapt, selling crafts, offering online tours, or shifting to other trades. Tourism remains a fragile but essential pillar of Egypt's economy, a reminder that the country's most valuable resource may not just be its monuments, but the living heritage of the people who guard them. Agriculture, as it has for millennia, continues to sustain millions. The Nile Delta produces wheat, rice, corn, and cotton, while countless small farmers depend on its fertile soil. But climate change, water scarcity, and urban expansion are straining this lifeline. The construction of Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam has stirred anxiety, threatening to reduce Egypt's share of the Nile's waters and raising fears about the future of agriculture. Meanwhile, the government pushes ambitious megaprojects to modernize the economy, building new highways, industrial zones, and even a new administrative capital in the desert east of Cairo. Supporters hail these projects as visionary, while critics argue they often prioritize prestige over addressing the everyday struggles of poverty and inequality. For the farmer struggling to irrigate his field or the family in Cairo struggling to pay rent, the promises of development can feel distant, overshadowed by immediate needs. Urban life in Egypt reveals stark contrasts. In Cairo, gleaming skyscrapers rise near ancient mosques, and luxury malls sit not far from sprawling informal settlements. Millions live in makeshift housing, navigating unreliable electricity and limited sanitation, while a small elite enjoys lavish lifestyles. Youth unemployment remains high, leaving many graduates with diplomas but no opportunities. This imbalance has fueled frustration, migration dreams, and sometimes desperation. Yet amidst these hardships, Egypt's cities pulse with creativity. Young entrepreneurs launch startups. Artists transform graffiti into political statements, and social media becomes a platform for voices once silenced. The resilience of ordinary Egyptians, their ability to adapt and endure, forms the silent backbone of the economy that statistics may struggle to capture, but daily life makes impossible to ignore. Perhaps Egypt's greatest challenge lies in its demographics. With more than half its population under 25, the country faces both a potential demographic dividend and a looming crisis. If jobs, education, and opportunities can be provided, Egypt could harness the energy of its youth to fuel growth. But if not, frustration may spill into unrest. As it did in 2011, the stakes are high. Egypt must create millions of jobs every year just to keep pace with its growing population. Education reforms, healthcare investments, and women's empowerment remain vital but underfunded areas. The story of Egypt's present is therefore not just about monuments or politics, it is about its people, their resilience, their struggles, and their dreams. It is in the laughter of children playing soccer in dusty alleys, in the determination of farmers tending their crops, and in the hope of young Egyptians who still believe that tomorrow can be brighter than today. Egypt's position on the world stage has always been defined by geography. Sitting at the crossroads of Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean, Egypt controls the Suez Canal, one of the most strategic waterways on Earth. Every year, trillions of dollars worth of goods pass through its narrow channel, linking Europe to Asia, the Gulf to the Atlantic. This alone makes Egypt a key player in global trade and geopolitics. But Egypt's role extends beyond commerce. It is also a political heavyweight in the Arab world. From the days of Nasser's Pan-Arabism to its role as the first Arab nation to sign peace with Israel, Egypt has often stood at the heart of regional diplomacy. Today, that role continues, though often in a more cautious, pragmatic way, balancing relations with global powers like the United States, Russia, and China, while managing delicate ties with its neighbors. Yet, challenges loom on every border. To the west, Libya remains unstable, and Egypt worries about militant groups and weapons flowing across the desert. To the east, the conflict between Israel and Palestine continues to test Egypt's diplomacy, as it frequently mediates ceasefires in Gaza while maintaining its own peace treaty with Israel. To the south, the waters of the Nile have become a flashpoint with Ethiopia over the Grand Renaissance Dam, a project that Cairo fears could threaten its very lifeline. The dispute has fueled years of tense negotiations and periodic threats of escalation. Within this regional storm, Egypt must navigate carefully, seeking stability while protecting its national interests. Every decision, every alliance, carries weight not just for Egypt, but for the wider region that looks to Cairo for leadership. Internally, Egypt faces the delicate balance between security and freedom. Since the Arab Spring of 2011, the state has tightened its grip, citing the need to maintain stability after years of turmoil. Political dissent has been curbed, media tightly controlled, and civil society restricted. Critics argue that such measures stifle the energy of the very youth who could transform the country, while supporters claim strong governance is necessary in a region plagued by conflict and chaos. The truth lies somewhere in between. Egypt yearns for stability, but stability alone cannot feed the hungry, employ the jobless, or unlock the potential of its young generation. The challenge for Egypt's leaders is to build a system that offers both security and opportunity, without crushing the voices of those who dream of change. Despite these struggles, Egypt's spirit endures. From the bustling streets of Alexandria to the villages of Upper Egypt, ordinary people find ways to adapt, to celebrate, and to endure. Weddings burst with music, laughter fills the tea houses, and Ramadan nights transform cities into living festivals of light and generosity. These cultural threads hold Egypt together, reminding the world that this nation is more than politics. More than crisis. It is a civilization that has weathered storms for 5,000 years. The pyramids still stand not because of stone alone, but because of the people whose resilience and creativity built them. That same resilience pulses in today's Egypt in the hands of the farmer, the dreams of the student, and the prayers of families who refuse to surrender hope. As Egypt looks toward the future, its path is uncertain, yet filled with possibility. Can it harness the energy of its youth, modernize its economy, and become a bridge between continents once again? Or will the weight of poverty, population growth, and political strain hold it back? The answer lies not in its monuments or in the corridors of power, but in the millions of Egyptians who wake each morning with determination to carve out a better life. The story of Egypt is far from over. It is still being written in every classroom, every factory, every village, and every city street. And just as the Nile has flowed for millennia, carrying both life and challenge, so too will Egypt continue its journey, a nation eternal, standing between past and future, forever. A symbol of resilience, hope, and human endurance. The Nile flows as it has for millennia, carrying with it the stories of pharaohs, conquerors, and everyday Egyptians. From the pyramids to the bustling streets of Cairo, Egypt stands as a testament to human resilience, creativity, and hope. Its history is written in stone, its culture in song and dance, and its future in the hearts of its people. Through struggle and triumph, Egypt endures, a land eternal, a story still unfolding, reminding us that some legacies are never finished, and some dreams never fade.